Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. I'm glad to see every one of you here, and I'm glad to have a chance. This is my first chance back in Massachusetts to talk about my new book. And so I thought what I'd do is I'd tell you a little bit about the book, and I'd read a little bit from the book, and then save as much time as we possibly can for questions and answers and a chance to just to be able to talk. So I want to tell you, I start this book with my own story. I was the late in life baby. My mother always called me the surprise. I was about 30 before I figured out what that meant. I had 3 older brothers. They all served in the military. And I start this book in the early 1960s. At this point, all 3 of my brothers are off in the military. By then, my dad is selling carpeting. He had a heart attack, and he was out of work for a long time. The bills piled up. We lost the family station wagon. We came right to the edge of losing our home. My mother had been a stay-at-home mom. She was 50 years old, and I remember walking into her bedroom and seeing her best dress out on the bed. She was going to pull that dress on and walk over to Sears and apply for a minimum wage job, which she got and which she used to save our house. Because in the 1960s, a minimum wage job would keep a family of 3 out of poverty. My daddy ended up as maintenance man. My mother kept working that minimum wage job. We saved our home, but there was no money for college. I married at 19. I had a baby not long afterwards, but I had a chance to go to school. I went to a commuter college that cost $50 a semester. And then when my daughter Amelia was 2, I headed off to a public law school. And I drop her off at daycare every morning and head into law school. Opened a lot of doors for me. So I pick up the story. I thought it might be fun to read a little bit about that time in the book. So, one morning when Amelia was little, she was sitting in a booster chair at the kitchen table eating cereal. I popped a few pieces of bread into our toaster oven, got busy doing 6 other things, and then quickly forgot about the toast. When I saw smoke pouring out of the toaster oven, I grabbed the handle and pulled out the tray, exposing 4 slices of bread that were on fire, as in flaming. Always a quick thinker, I screamed. And I threw the tray at the kitchen sink. 3 pieces of toast hit the target, but the 4th went high, setting those cute little yellow kitchen curtains on fire. So I screamed again. Then I grabbed Amelia's cereal bowl. I threw it at the burning curtains. The milk doused most of the fire, and I calmed down enough to realize that throwing things was probably not my most effective strategy. Then I noticed that the toaster itself was shooting sparks and seemed to be on fire. How long had that thing been on? So I got a glass, filled it with water. No. I really had the same thought. I thought, and then I paused. I poured the water on what remained of the curtains, grabbed a towel, and beat the toaster until everything seemed to be quiet. It cooled down, and I could unplug it. I'm not 100% sure, but that may have been the year that I started so many kitchen fires that my daddy gave me a fire extinguisher for Christmas. Oh, happy day. Now, back then, our toaster oven had an on-off switch, and that was it. On meant on, which meant that it was possible to leave toast under that little broiler all day and all night until the food burned, the wiring melted, and the whole thing burst into flames. At some point, I have no idea exactly when, someone had the idea of adding a timer and an automatic shutoff. This simple change made it a whole lot harder for distracted mothers or anyone else to leave the broiler running until it set the kitchen on fire. 30 years later, while working on an article about how the government could protect consumers from predatory financial companies, I thought about that old toaster oven. By then, it was all but impossible to buy a toaster that had a 1 in 5 chance of bursting into flames and burning down your house. But by the 2000s, it was possible to refinance a home with a mortgage that had a 1 in 5 chance of costing a family their home and putting them out on the street. In fact, it wasn't just possible. Those mortgages were bursting into flames all over the country. So why the difference? The United States government was the difference. By 2007, the year I was writing this article, a government agency actually monitored toasters for basic safety. The agency, if anyone tried to sell a toaster that had a tendency to burst into flames, the agency would put a stop to it. In fact, government agencies ensured the basic safety of pretty much every product offered for sale. The agencies worked to keep us safe. No lead paint in children's toys, no medicines laced with rat poison, no cars without functioning brakes, and no exploding toasters. But in 2007, there was no government agency that would stop the sale of exploding mortgages. And that's a big part of what my life is about. So I tell a lot of stories in this book, stories about growing up, stories about being a young mother, stories about starting a career, stories about setting the kitchen on fire. But I tell these stories because the thread of my story is America's story. I am the daughter of a maintenance man who ended up in the United States Senate. And I made it because America invested in kids like me. Coming out of the Great Depression, America made 2 really crucial decisions. First, it put strong rules in place to level the playing field. There were regulations and rules with a basic idea that no one should steal your purse on Main Street or your pension on Wall Street. Over time, there were other safety rules: safe drinking water, safe medicine, and eventually safe toasters. And second, coming out of the Great Depression, America invested in our kids, investing in education, in roads and bridges, in power grids, in basic research. With an education, kids could produce more and earn more. With infrastructure and research, we could build a real future in this country, and we could create the kind of vibrant economy that would help our kids do more and have more. And it worked. For half a century, as our country got richer, our families got richer. And as our families got richer, our country got richer. It worked for us. And then about 30 years ago, Republicans started pushing for a different approach. Their first idea: take the cops off the beat. Let the big banks load up on risks, let them paint a bullseye on the backsides of every American family, make deregulation the mantra of the day. And their second idea: cut taxes. Open up huge tax loopholes. Cut taxes most for those at the top. And how are we going to pay for those tax cuts? By cutting investments in our future. Cut spending on education, on roads and bridges, on medical research. And the result? We see it now. Banks and other corporations made huge profits, and billionaires kept more of their money. In other words, the rich got richer, and the powerful got more powerful. Meanwhile, the middle class began to crumble. The economy crashed, and our kids may be the first generation in American history to do worse than their parents. By 2009, I was in Washington, partly fighting the big banks over the TARP bailout, and partly working hard to try to get a new consumer agency passed into law. I was still thinking about that toaster, and hoping to stop the big banks that had cheated families by loading up mortgages and credit cards with tricks and traps. I wanted to level the playing field. I wanted the new consumer agency to be part of the Dodd-Frank financial reforms. No surprise, the big banks hated it. They hated it. In fact, they were quoted saying this, their lobbyists were quoted, it was their number one priority to kill the consumer agency. And by 2009, they were spending more than $1 million a day lobbying Washington. Think about that, to cut back on financial reforms. Now, here's where the story starts. This part that I want to tell you. Even with a Democratic majority in the House, we had barely gotten the consumer agency through, but we had. And now the financial reforms had made it over to the Senate. So let me pick up with that in the United States Senate. It was Friday morning, January 15th, 2010, and the calls started coming in early. I was at home, up early to work out on the treadmill in the basement, and I was still huffing and puffing when the phone rang the first time. Had I seen this morning's Wall Street Journal, the rumors were flying on Capitol Hill. The consumer agency wasn't going to make it. In an effort to move a larger financial reform bill, Senator Dodd would trade it off. There might be some face-saving attempt to set up a new consumer protection department somewhere else in government, but there would be no strong, independent agency with the authority to get much of anything done. The insiders sent the word out. Too bad, so sorry, it was a good idea, but unless the agency was dropped from the reform bill, the whole package of legislation would fail. Better to toss the consumer agency overboard and get the other reforms through. I listened. So this was it. The consumer agency was dead. All the families had been cheated by big banks and credit card companies. All the hard work by Barney, the consumer groups, Heather, Dan, the president, all that knocking on doors and all those meetings. And now it was all coming to an end. So I asked if there would be a vote, even a losing vote, but the answer was no. The death wouldn't be a public execution. No, instead, the Senate Banking Committee would propose a financial reform bill with no consumer agency. No one in the Senate, not a single Democrat or a single Republican, would ever have to vote against the agency. Instead, it would just be suffocated quietly in its crib. No one would ever know exactly who had killed it or why. So I asked my last question. When? How long before the locked-in version of the bill would be introduced in the Senate Banking Committee, with or without the consumer agency? Best estimate, 3 weeks. The deal wasn't finalized yet, and there were a lot of other moving pieces that still needed to be worked out. So I called Dan, my former student and my wingman down in Washington. I said, Dan, we've got 3 weeks. The way I saw it, we had nothing to lose. I didn't want a job in the Capitol, so what did I care if I ticked off a lot of people in Washington? This was our last chance to get this agency into law. If we lost now, we lost forever. We had very little information about what had led to the latest assault on the agency, but we did know one thing. The Senate did not want a tough vote on this issue. Dan explained what that meant. The consumer agency was popular, and to a lot of senators, a vote on the new agency meant having to choose between angering the public and angering the banks. And they didn't want to anger either. They preferred a quiet and slightly mysterious death for the agency. So I figured, too bad. Too damn bad. If a bunch of senators were going to pick the banks over the families, then the American public had a right to know. And if we didn't win, at least we could raise one hell of a stink. And that's what happened next in the story. So here's what I see. Washington works for those who can hire armies of lobbyists and lawyers. But for everybody else, not so much. I saw it with the big banks. They cheated American families, they crashed the economy, they got bailed out, and now the big five financial institutions are 38% bigger than they were back in 2008. They still swagger through Washington, blocking reforms and pushing around agencies. A kid gets caught with a few ounces of pot and goes to jail, but a big bank breaks the law on laundering drug money or manipulating currency, and no one even gets arrested. The game is rigged. The game is rigged. The game is rigged, and it's not just the big banks. Look around. Our college kids are getting crushed by student loan debt. We need to rebuild our roads and bridges and upgrade our power grid. We need more investments in medical research and in scientific research. But instead of building a future, this country is bleeding billions of dollars in tax loopholes and subsidies that go to rich and powerful corporations. Billionaires get so many tax loopholes that they pay less in taxes than their secretaries do. But corporate lobbyists and their Republican friends refuse to close a single loophole. They protect every privilege for the rich and the powerful. The game is rigged. The rich and the powerful have lobbyists and lawyers and plenty of friends in Congress. The rest of the folks, not so much. So, this is why I wrote this book. We can whine about this, we can whimper about this, or we can fight back. Me, I'm fighting back. For me, that's what writing this book is all about. The game is rigged, and it's up to us to fix it. Now, before anyone says, but change is hard and Washington is broken, before anyone says they've given up, let me tell you something. That little consumer agency, the one that the banks said they would kill and spent more than $1 million a day lobbying, we got it passed into law. We got it passed into law because the people wanted it. And better yet, here's what's happened. That little agency has only been in existence for a couple of years now, but it has already returned more than $3 billion directly into the pockets of people who got cheated by big financial institutions. In other words, we can make something work in Washington. We can do it. Now, I'm not ready to turn this country over to rich corporations and their lobbyists. I'm not ready to do that. I believe that this is our moment in history. It may not be the one we picked. This may not be the fight we thought we were going to have. But it's in front of us. And together, we are the ones who will decide the future. I wrote this book out of gratitude. Gratitude to my mother and my daddy, who worked so hard all their lives and ended up with so little, except that they knew that their kids were going to do better than they did. And for them, that meant they died as successes. I wrote this book out of gratitude to my parents and out of gratitude to an America that once invested in kids and said, we run this country not so that a few people can make it, but so that every kid gets a fighting chance. For me, that's what this is all about. Thank you. Thank you. All right, Alex.
Thank you so much, Senator.
Okay.
And thank you for your book.
Thank you. I will take banks for 200, Alex.
All right.
I think Alex has questions here.
It is in the form of a question.
Okay, good.
Our first question tonight comes from Andrew, who asks, do you see reforms to the federal student loan program to allow graduates to refinance their loans passing Congress within the next 4 years?
4 years? Andrew, come on, step up your game. Yes, I do see it passing Congress. So let's talk for a minute about student loans. Here's the deal on student loans. We all know cost of college has skyrocketed. We can talk about a lot of reasons, but I'm going to give you a key one. 3 out of 4 students who are in college are in a public university, and support for our public universities has gone down, down, down. A generation ago, $3 out of $4 that it took to educate someone in a public university was supported by tax dollars. Today, it's $1 in $4. Families are asked to pick up the difference. I believe profoundly in our public system, our public universities, as giving an affordable option for a good education for our kids. We can do a lot of amazing things on top of that, to the side of that, around that with private schools. But public universities really are the heart of keeping doors open for the middle class. That has begun to close, and we see the consequences. Students whose folks can't afford to write a check outright for college take on more and more debt. They do it for public school, they do it for private school, so that we now live in a world where students owe collectively $1.2 trillion in student loan debt. Now, here's where the story really gets rugged. Put on your seatbelts if you haven't heard this one, because what happens next is really appalling. The United States government steps in and says, we'll lend kids the money. Great, I think that's exactly the right thing to do. But then it comes to paying the price for it. And the price is that the student loan will be set at a rate where you cover the costs of the borrowing, I got that, the administrative costs for setting up the loan, the bad debt losses, I got it, and then the federal government for undergrads nearly doubles that amount, for graduate students nearly triples that amount. Why? To produce tens of billions of dollars in revenue to support other functions in government. The government should not be making a profit off the backs of our kids. That is just fundamentally wrong. Fundamentally wrong. So, Andrew, not 4 years, we're going to introduce a bill next month in the United States Senate, next month or early June. I'm not sure where it is exactly on the calendar. And the idea is to refinance the outstanding student loan debt, to bring it down so that students have a better chance to get an education and to get a start in life without being crushed by student loan debt. So I'm counting on you, Andrew. You better be there in that fight, because we're going to do this. We're going to do this.
Our next question is from Rita, who asks, what do you think about the United States Postal Service entering the quote-unquote banking business?
Oh, I like this. Postal banking. Okay. We do. We've just got a chance here. So, look, for me, this is just the possibility for a win-win out there. Let me think of how to put this. We have roughly about 14 million Americans who are, it's called unbanked or underbanked. They don't have regular checking account, savings account access to banks. And so instead, they pay for their services, banking services, by going to check cashing to get their paychecks, cash, bill paying outfits, and they charge a big slice. If they need a short-term loan, they go to payday lenders for this. In fact, there is some evidence now that families who don't have access to regular banking services are paying about 10% of their income on just managing the banking services part of this. Think about that. Think about what that means. So we've got families where there's a need, and we've got post offices. About 59% of post offices are in what are called banking deserts. That is, they're in areas where there are either no or only one banking outlet. And in fact, the way that we have seen now where the big financial institutions are going is that they are closing branches in neighborhoods and areas where median income is less than $50,000, so that they are opening more, and at the same time they are opening more branches in neighborhoods where median income is above $100,000. So we're just watching a shift in banking services. One kind of banking service is available to people who've got money, and a different kind for everybody else. So just the basics, getting the bills paid, right? Getting the checks cashed. If we would just make the basics available at a modest cost, we could do it through our post offices. It keeps our post offices open. We've got good people there. These are skills we can train for. And I just see this as a win-win. So I'm out there pulling on this one. I think we can do this. I like this.
Rachel, a former student.
Whoa! I will be calling on Rachel later today. Yes. You guys are lucky I don't have a seating chart. I always call on people in the back row. I noticed someone's head snapped up when I said that. Yeah, you were hiding back there. I saw you. You got to make sure the back row stays awake. That's what teachers know. Okay.
Rachel would love to hear you speak about your legislation strengthening SSI, and thank you for doing so.
All right. So we've got a lot of pieces out there. You know what I want to talk about is with Social Security. One of the things I think about is how many families, how many people worked hard all their lives, and Social Security is it for them. For 14 million Americans, Social Security is all that stands between them and poverty. Now, we have two obligations as a people, I believe. People should be able, after a lifetime of work, to retire with dignity. And I think we accomplish that by doing two things. The first is that we make sure that Social Security is going to be stable for the rest of this century. We need to make the adjustments in how much comes in and how we allocate what goes out so that we know it's stable. But the second thing we need to do, we need to raise payments for those at the bottom who depend on it. We can do this. It's math. We sit down and it's how much comes in and how much goes out. But here's something I want to make that's key about this. This is another one of those key values questions. You can talk about this 100 different ways about, somebody wants to raise taxes, somebody wants to do this, somebody wants to do that. What we really have to talk about is we have to spend our money consistent with our values. And part of those values are that we say to people, you worked hard all your life. When it comes time to retire, there will be a Social Security safety net there for you. It's not only the right thing to do economically, it's the kind of people we are. It is the right thing to do morally. And we're going to fight for this. We're going to do this.
This question comes from Lizzie, who is 7 years old.
Lizzie. All right, go Lizzie.
Who asks, do you have any children?
Good, Lizzie. And the answer is yes, I do. I have a girl and a boy, and they are all grown up. But now my daughter Amelia is married to a man named Sushil, and I have 3 grandchildren. So I have a granddaughter named Octavia, check that out, a granddaughter named Lavinia, and a grandson named Atticus. And I'll tell you one thing about each one of them. What can I tell you about each one of them? Octavia fences. She really does. And it means you don't want to get into a poking tickle war with her because she's really good. Lavinia is a gymnast, and she can do a backward cartwheel with her hands not touching the ground. It really impresses me. And Atticus, who's the littlest one, Atticus is 3, he makes coffee with his granddad, who's sitting over there. So that's something about each one of mine. Hope to see you later, Lizzie.
Our next question, what can be done about the horrible lack of mental health services? And what can we do?
All right, so let me start with the good news, because there actually is some good news here. With the Affordable Care Act, and actually with some earlier legislation on parity, it is finally the case that there will not be health insurance policies out there that do not cover mental health services. We are finally beginning as a people to say you've got to treat mental health issues the same way you treat all health issues. And that is a step so much in the right direction. The next time someone tells you they want to repeal the Affordable Care Act, ask them about that part in particular. The fact that millions of people are going to get coverage for mental health services is just powerfully important. But the second part that I want to talk about in this, we've got so much more to do. It's about funding having people in public schools, having enough people who are in emergency rooms, about having enough people in community health centers. We're working on it here in Massachusetts. We're making strides, but we're still way behind the need. So this is partly about getting resources to the right place. But the third one I have to mention, this is why we need to double our funding to the NIH and to the NIMH. We need more funding on all health-related issues, but particularly on mental health issues. We are at a moment in the world where we've just kind of got our toes right on the edge of fundamentally changing how we look at mental health issues. Always before, in effect, we had to wait until they manifested themselves, and then you were always trying to deal with symptoms. How do you treat symptoms? Now, the brain science work is advancing so fast. The Genome Project is advancing so fast that we're on the edge of being able to do diagnosis and at least to conceive the idea of real treatment much earlier in the process, before there is so much damage, before there is so much heartbreak. What's holding us back? It's not the science, it's that we're not investing in the science. Today, a young researcher at NIH, NIMH, the odds of getting funded shrink and shrink and shrink. Overall, proposals for funding to NIH to get work done, about 1 in 7 gets funded. I just want you to think about the other 6 out there, about Alzheimer's and autism, about diabetes and cancer. If your family is touched by those things, then your family is touched by the decisions that are being made in Washington to preserve loopholes for billion-dollar corporations, to keep giving subsidies to big corporations so that there's no money left to be able to invest in our future. This is one, you want to know what we can do now? This is why the budget process matters. This is why our voices matter. It goes back to the fundamental point that I make in this book over and over, and that I keep making when I talk to people. The game is rigged. The playing field is tilted. Money and power are concentrated on one end, and they make sure that every rule that gets passed works for them. All we've got on our side are our voices and our votes, and we got to use them, and we got to use them loud. That's how I feel about this one. You bet.
Senator Warren.
Yes.
You've said,
I know, it surprises me when people say that. Yes.
You've said a number of times that you do not plan to run for president. What can we say tonight to change your mind?
I am not running for president. But listen, because this really is important. It ties to the answer I just gave. It ties to all these answers. We can't keep putting off what we need to talk about. We can't keep saying, I realize things are fun to speculate about, but we've got issues we've got to dig in on right now. Student loans. We're going to have this bill up in another 4 to 6 weeks. We have got to be ready to take to the airwaves, to take to email, to take to our friends around the country, and to say this is a fight that really matters, and it's got to come out our way. We've got issue after issue on this minimum wage. No one should work full-time and still live in poverty. That's an issue we've got to deal with. Social Security, accountability for the big banks, you know what the list is. It is in the specific, and it is in front of us now, and we cannot be distracted. We have got to get organized on these issues. I was thinking about the answer to the previous question. You said, what can we do now? And, I just said, we've got to do this. The truth is, we do have to do this, and this means organization. It really does. It means getting connected on the web. This is our one big, powerful thing. I hope everybody in here is already, I hope you get emails from me every day. Right? Because that's how we know. I hope everybody in here is part of another organization somewhere around the country. It's not that you need to be lobbying your delegation. We've got a great delegation here in Massachusetts. We do. Fabulous. But every one of you has friends around the country, has relatives around the country, belongs to an organization that has members around the country. We got to get all of them excited to go talk to their senators and to go talk to their reps. And I don't mean that as kind of a generic, yeah, maybe someday you'll pass along an email. I mean make a real commitment to do that. Because otherwise, the world just keeps working better and better for those who've already made it, and we're forfeiting a future for our children, and we just can't do that. This is what's on the line, and it's on the line right now. Right now. We got to do this. Okay.
We have a couple more here.
Okay.
Next question. What do you think of chances for a Mideast Peace settlement?
That's a tough one. Look, I support a two-state solution. The most hopeful thing I had seen in the last several years was when John Kerry said he was going to make it his first priority as Secretary of State to get the parties to negotiate a lasting peace agreement. Because by making it a priority, by drawing attention back to it, trying to get the parties to the negotiating table, because look, we can't negotiate it for the parties. There has to be safety and security, but it has to be something the parties themselves believe in and can stand behind and live with over a long period of time. I was hopeful that we would move in that direction. I know we saw everything else happening. Iran, of course, tangles all of that. We've watched what's happened with Syria. Now everyone's attention has shifted over to Ukraine. But it was discouraging to see the parties ratcheting up their language that sounded like they were both moving away from negotiations. And I give Secretary Kerry a lot of credit for two things. One was for hanging in there and not just saying, but the other was for being willing to beat up a little on both of them, to say, this isn't going to work long term. You've got to get back together and negotiate something that's going to last over the long haul. So I'm worried about it. But right now, I stand with Secretary Kerry on this, and I am very hopeful that if anyone can do anything, he can. I think he's a good man, and I think he's trying hard on this one. That's the best I can do.
Thank you. And our last question here is...
Make it a good one.
It's pretty good.
Okay.
It's about a book.
It's about a book. Uh-huh.
Thanks to Thomas Piketty's new book.
Yes. Have any of you, have you seen Piketty's new book? You've read Piketty's new book? Yes.
Capital in the 21st Century.
Another book that has tables and graphs. This book doesn't. This is one of my first books with there are no graphs in this book. Just pictures. Okay.
So thanks to Piketty's new book, we know the trickle-down policies of the past 30 years definitively do not work.
Can we say that part again? Definitively do not work. And in fact, let's just all be clear about this. Definitively do not work, not as in that's somebody else's opinion or this comes out of a long-held political position. The data don't lie on this. He's got good historical data, but boy, what he shows is trickle down doesn't work. Never did, doesn't work. Okay. Just so we're all clear on the baseline. I just saved you 1,100 pages of reading. I'm sorry, I cut you off in the middle of the
Definitively do not work.
Okay, good.
How can both business and government effect real change to ensure greater distribution of resources and thus increased opportunity for all?
So this is what, to me, is so encouraging about Thomas Piketty's book. That you can read his book and you just want to say, oh, because it says over and over, look, I'll tell you the basic theme, the rich get richer. That once you can accumulate capital, you can make the thing grow on its own, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's less and less and less for everybody else, not just like the bottom slice, but all the way. There's just less and less, and that's the way it tends to work. Return on capital is what he talks about. But here's the hopeful part in Piketty's book. Piketty makes the point that although the data keep documenting this happening, it's not like an act of nature. It's not like gravity, and you can't fix it. Gravity is just there, just over and over. Things fall on your head, you say, wow, gravity again. Piketty's book makes the point that how much inequality there is, how much growth is distributed through the economy is a matter of the policies you choose to follow. And that, for example, progressive taxation or investment in everybody's education has a profound effect on helping to level the playing field again. So, with Piketty's book coming out right now, I feel this great sense of, he's got the hard data about what happens if we follow policies that continue to let the rich get richer, and what happens if we fix that. Let me point out one other thing about Piketty's book. Okay, there was more in it than I told you with that one sentence. But there's one incredibly cool part. He talks about, in effect, the half century from the Great Depression to the early 1980s, that one period that he describes statistically in many ways as kind of an aberration in economic history. Why is it an aberration? It is the time when we made those investments that built America's great middle class. And we made those decisions, not we in this room, but our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents. They made those decisions. They said, you put a cop on the beat so that nobody steals your pension. You do that on Wall Street. But they also said, and you tax progressively, and then you make those investments. For those who made it big, God bless them. That's great. But they've got to pay a piece of that forward so the next kid has a chance to make it big, and the kid after that, and the kid after that. To me, that's what defines America. That is America at its best. When it says, we don't build for a few of us. We don't create opportunities just for some of us. We believe here in America that we invest in a future so every kid has got a fighting chance. That's what this book is about. Landed it.